Welcome to part 2 of the final extra lecture for Justice and Society. In this slide, we're going to talk about communitarianism, which some thinkers are classified as, including Michael Sandel. So classical liberalism doesn't want to take a position on morality because they want to leave it up to the individual to decide what it means to live a good life. So this is individual liberty. There are competing systems of what it means to have a good life, from religious to secular. And the government in classical liberalism is maximizing freedom, individual liberty. So they want to take out values from their policy making. But Aristotle and other virtue ethicists can admit that there's variation in morality, but they disagree that it can be extricated, which just means taken out of or separated from public life. All issues of social organization, on this view, involve decisions on how we ought to live and how we ought not to live. So, of course, Aristotle was thousands of years ago, and it's changed and morphed and matured in lots of different ways. And Sandel's view is a variation of virtue ethics called communitarianism. So communitarians criticize classical liberal policies like all the ones that we've looked at so far: libertarianism, utilitarianism, Rawls, Kant, for overemphasis on the individual. So think about how all of those moral systems started. The rational, self-interested individual citizen. It doesn't have to just be understood economically, but a lot of times in contemporary society it is. So we have an aggregate of many, many individually rational, self-interested citizens. Now I want you to think about all the way near the beginning of the semester when we were reading Marion Young's 5 Faces of Oppression. In the first half of the article, she took this on specifically. She said that in political thought and in social thought, people had just assumed that all social groups were formed after the individual self was formed. So you have fully formed, rational, self-interested people deciding to join a group, whether or not that are Democrat and Republican, economically conservative or liberal, whatever group it is, the people were formed before they joined it. And she criticized this. She said, you're born into some groups. They might be changeable, the idea of what it means to be a rich person or a poor person or a woman or a man or someone from India or China or the United States or Mexico. But they are out there in the world as social identities, and you're born into them. You don't choose a lot of them. And in that case, the community is prior to the individual. And what that means is that the ideals or the characteristics of the groups help to shape who you are. We are deeply social in this way. We're interdependent. Everything from the goods and services that we trade to who we are is deeply embedded with the social world. So in a communitarian view, life is just as much about community and group membership as it is an individual endeavor. So we have to think about what that means, especially in regard to trying to find a system to run our lives that is as just as possible. So the only way on this view to cultivate justice, equality, and freedom is to make sure that community goals, community values, community policies are interdependent goals and values, are worked at just as much as, or even sometimes instead of, individual goals, values, and policies. So think back to that Aristotelian list of what individual values can be. You want to be a courageous person, a generous person, a kind person. And no communitarian is saying that that's a bad thing. They're saying that there are values that are specific to groups of people, and that if we want a just world, we have to think about that. So that's what Chapter 10 in Sandel's Justice is arguing. Welfare, rights, and individual freedom and liberty are important, but so are the virtues involved with living a good life. And they include those individual virtues, but also community virtues. That's what communitarianism is. So now we're going to take a look at the actual text itself. It starts on page 244, chapter 10, Justice and the Common Good. Throughout the chapter, Sandel weaves the speeches and works and beliefs of politicians, activists, civil rights leaders, all throughout to support his claim that morality can't be eliminated from public life and the pursuit of justice. He has quotes from John F. Kennedy, from his brother Robert Kennedy, from Barack Obama, Martin Luther King Jr., and others. At the very beginning, he talks about JFK. And JFK had a difficult time for a while during his presidential campaign because he was Catholic. Now, no president before him had been Catholic. So the public and the media were concerned that his religion, that was different to the majority, would interfere with his policy and law-making decisions. So something like if the Pope issued an edict that would shape or change the decisions that JFK made. So he gave a speech on September 12th, 1960, and it was completely backed by classically liberal values. He disavowed religion and morality in government. So he said religion and morality do not have a place in government, and he adamantly stated that he would not let his personal morality affect any of his presidential decisions. You fast forward to President Obama, and he has spoken about bringing morality back into public discourse and conversation. So here's a long quote from the Sandel text, but this is Obama speaking on page 245. The discomfort of some progressives with any hint of religion has often prevented us from effectively addressing issues in moral terms. Discourse empty of religious content forfeits the imagery and terminology through which millions of Americans understand both their personal morality and social justice. So he isn't saying that you have to be religious to have moral standards or values, but he is saying that the vast majority of the population understands their value system and the way they think the world should be through their religions. And trying to cut that out completely just stops the conversation. So, what changed in the American political landscape from 1960, or as I put up here, the 1970s to now? Why does Obama think it's important to bring moral discourse back into public life? So, Sandel discusses it in the section he calls the aspiration to neutrality. And that starts on page 246. So classical liberals like JFK and many, many others acknowledge that there's moral pluralism. So that says even when there are reasonable, knowledgeable, and free adults, and they're arguing on good faith, they might not be able to agree with one another when it comes to value systems and morality. So think about different religious tenets. You really, really believe in yours. The other person really, really believes in theirs. You discuss it with one another. But even at the end, with reasonableness and open-mindedness, you might not be able to agree. So there are multiple reasonable moral systems. That's moral pluralism. And classical liberals say that the government has no right to pick one or the other or any of them and choose for everybody. So 1970s liberals stuck to this, while at the same time conservatives were increasing their power base on explicitly moral terms. So this is the beginning of the rise of the Christian right. And it was emerging as a social and a political force, and it still holds sway today. So liberals came back and said, no, we are a party of values too. But our values concern tolerance of this pluralism, fairness to everybody, and the freedom to choose. Sandel says these are important, but he doesn't think they're enough to create a meaningful life for people. So he gives another Obama quote on page 250, and I'm going to read that to you. It's the bottom, and it's indented. It's a long quote. He says, each day, it seems, thousands of Americans are going about their daily rounds, dropping off the kids at school, driving to the office, flying to a business meeting, shopping at the mall, trying to stay on their diets, and they're coming to realize that something is missing. They're deciding that their work, their possessions, their diversions, their sheer busyness is not enough. They want a sense of purpose, a narrative arc to their lives. If we truly hope to speak to people where they're at, to communicate our hopes and values in a way that's relevant to their own, then as progressives we cannot abandon the field of religious discourse. So we need to embrace, if we are progressives, a faith-friendly form of public reason. But aside from being a progressive or not being a progressive, Sandel says, and I have this quote here up on the slide, that it needs to be part of political philosophy as well. Not necessarily religious argumentation, but moral argumentation. He says, the attempts to detach arguments about justice and rights from arguments about the good life is mistaken for two reasons. First, it's not always possible to decide questions about justice and rights without resolving substantive moral questions. And second, even where it's possible, it might not be desirable. So he's going to do two case studies, and in the first section, he thinks that he's come up with some issues in life that you cannot possibly take the moral questions out of it. And then he's going to look at another issue where it's possible to take the moral questions out of it, but maybe we shouldn't. And I am going to end part 2 here. I'll see you in part 3.